authoritative judgment for intoxicated rebels. Quite a word he taught them. You'll understand it as we get into it. Isaiah, the book of Isaiah opens as though it is a body camera, rolling footage. You know, that's the police now all have to carry around a camera. They got to wear a camera because everything's got to be recorded because nobody believes them. The blue lights of divine authority are flashing against a rebellious nation that's drifted out of its lane. God steps to the window, not as a stranger, but as a father confronting his own children. Most men think intoxication only comes from a bottle, alcohol or something. But if the devil can't poison a man with pills, legal or otherwise, that's most of what's going on today, is everybody's on pills, but they've been prescribed. It's just legal drugs. It's still drugs. It has one purpose, from the devil's point of view, to make your mind not work. That's dangerous. He'll poison them through something else. Rebellion. Rebellion will do the same thing to a man. Rebellion will make your mind not work. That's what we're going to find. That's exactly how God sees the nation of Israel when he's confronting them. Look at Isaiah 5, verse 7. Isaiah 5, verse 7. Now, I don't think this message is for anybody in here, but maybe it's for you to pass on. Rarely do you get to pass on a message, though, without making some application. Isaiah 5, verse 7. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. He's contrasted some things here. He wanted to see some judgment, but he found oppression. He wanted to see some righteousness, but he heard a cry. That's not a good thing. The judgment there he's looking for, what kind of judgment is he looking for? This is the judge of all the earth looking to man. Is man going to judge him? No. What's the judgment he's looking for? God is looking to the earth, specifically to his children, his nation, and he wants to see a reflection of himself. He should be seeing the same judgment rationale that he uses being reflected in the people that are his. They should have inherited his way of thinking. And their, what do you call it when somebody's pulled over and they're drunk driving? They say your judgment is impaired. They don't mean you're not able to condemn people. They mean you can't think straight. God is the judge. He thinks correctly. That judgment should have been inherited by you at salvation. And the more Bible you get in, the more you learn to think correctly. Now you have proper judgment. Israel has lost their judgment. Once the evidence proves judgment is impaired, the driver loses his ability to govern himself. Here, Isaiah is given this thing as though he's showing us God's point of view. And God has determined that his people no longer can be trusted with their own judgment. That's scary. The nation is spiritually intoxicated. So Isaiah chapter 1 becomes that traffic stop, and God pulls over his people because they're no longer staying in their lane. He's seeing them weaving back and forth. And that's exactly what's going on. And we'll preach on that subject matter today. Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter 1. We'll start in verse 2, just so I can say I didn't read the whole chapter. Isaiah 1, verse 2. The thing that we'll see to begin with is the recognition of their rebellion. It wasn't hidden. Isaiah 1, verse 2. Hear, O heavens, and give earth, and give ear, O earth. He's tapping his body cam, making sure everything's recorded. For the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, they've rebelled against me. The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib, but Israel doth not know. My people doth not consider. He said they've lost the ability to think. They don't know something. Beyond not knowing, what little bit they do know, they should be able to meditate on. That's consider. That's to think of it, analyze it. They have no reasoning ability. Consider is one step beyond knowledge. You have to have knowledge first before you can consider knowledge. But you have to have something to consider. First of all, notice the rebellion is personal. This is not some government who has instituted some law. This is God, the creator of the universe. That's who they've offended. They're the only nation he revealed his laws to. And so when they broke them, they're more accountable than the heathen around them. Because the heathen around them didn't get the revelations they had. He says, I've nourished and brought up children. That's not painting them very pleasantly. Children. Children don't have a great reasoning ability to begin with. So this is how he's referring to them. These children are raised on privilege. God's fed them by hand. He protected them by the mercy of God and instructed them by the word of God, up close and personal. Yet they rebelled against him, the one who had sustained them their entire existence and still is. Rebellion is never merely breaking rules. You can break rules on accident. It doesn't mean you're in rebellion, but rebellion could be done whether you broke a rule or not. Rebellion's on the inside. Now, it will eventually work its way out, but it may be hid for a little while. For man, but not from God. The prodigal didn't just leave the house. He left the father. And where the father is in the house. The house doesn't mean much because the father can move beyond the house. He would still have a problem with the father if he saw him at the grocery store. That's the rebellion. The tragedy is this. Israel has sinned, that's true, but they sinned against the very source of love. God is love. When you walk away from that, what do you walk to? Just the opposite. Hate. Therefore, rebellion. Problem with rebellion is it's not nice. Their rebellion destroyed their recognition. Look at it in verse 3. It says, the ox knoweth his owner. They can recognize it. Even an animal, stupid animal, can look up and distinguish between two individuals. This one's my owner and that one's not. Now we know the smell would do something. They've got great sense of smell. However, even in a field, if it sees two people, a dog will know which one to run to. It recognizes something Israel can't recognize. They've seen two ways and they've chosen the one that's rebellious. Like spirits collect with like spirits. They've chosen to be rebellious, so they've aligned with something that's rebellious. The first rebel ever, Lucifer. He says, Israel doth not know. An ox or an ass knows who's going to give them food. I know we had horses growing up, and the barn, if you're out riding a horse, you better hold on to the reins tight if you're walking by the barn. Because they want to run into the barn. Israel doesn't recognize where the food's coming from. Israel doesn't recognize where they're really protected. They don't understand home base anymore. The animal would. Israel's become stupid. I mean that charitably. That's what rebellion does. It intoxicates the mind until people forget. We forget easily who blesses us, who protects us, who cares for us, who even gives us breath. You're not guaranteed breath. I know that the problem is not necessarily getting breath. The problem is this: what do we do with it after we got it? That's man's problem. That was Belshazzar's problem. Daniel comes in there and he says, hey, look, you knew all of these things. You understood the history. However, you've served another God besides the true God. And because of that, the one who's been loaning you breath is going to require the payment in full. It did. The first symptom of rebellion is spiritual amnesia. A rebellious generation forgets its father. Look around and you'll see it. All over America, the kids can't recognize that the family unit is their protected, safe space. It's got to happen that way. There's going to be a great falling away, and that falling away begins in the family. There's not many families left. Every family, at least one or two of the siblings, one or two of the children have gone haywire. It's the spirit of the age, the way it's going. But it started a long, long time ago with Israel, the nation. And that's to picture for us. The next thing I see is the rebellion became open defiance, and that's where it goes. That's when we start being able to recognize it, is when it's open. In verse 9, Isaiah 3, verse 9, I'll have to change chapters on you. Isaiah 3, verse 9, he says this, the show of their countenance doth witness against them. That is, there's a witness you can see, it's a billboard. They declare their sin as Sodom, they hide it not. There's no shame left, no blushing, no conviction, no restraint. It's open defiance. I am and deal with it. Sin is no longer concealed in our day and age, it's celebrated. That's the final stage of intoxication is this. Everybody look at me doing this against all the rules. I'm the king. A drunk man loses awareness of exposure. You know, you find these drunks out the bums, gutter bums I'm talking about, in the middle of winter. It's freezing. But yet they can sustain it. I guess that alcohol has done something to their brain. Make them think they're okay. They can be exposed to the elements and the weather and it's not a problem. Baloney. It's just they don't feel it. They've lost feeling. What once would have broken a Christian's heart, once they get into rebellion, they become desensitized to it. There's no rebellion or no embarrassment to a rebel nowadays. People don't blush anymore. People post their sin. They don't hide it. You know, everybody sins, that's true. But that doesn't mean everybody should be celebrating it. Everybody should be hiding it. That should be something you are embarrassed about and you go to God to get forgiveness of it before anybody else finds out. When a nation begins to parade what God condemns, judgment's standing right by the door and he's knocking, drop your window down, let me see your driver's license and registration. Rebellion never remains a theory. You know, we can read these things and we can say, okay, I understand how that works. And this is a philosophy. No, it's not a philosophy. These are facts. Once the heart rejects authority, the mind begins to decay. Something is intoxicating it. That brings us to our second thing we'll see. I call this the revelation of their ruin. When that intoxication hits the brain, it begins to kill brain cells. The more of them you kill, the less you can think, the less you can converse with other people. It starts happening immediately. Immediately, it happens with the social drinker, and he doesn't realize it's happening. If he continues, it starts happening at the table when he can't speak correctly. Why is that? That something just happened in the brain. It's not good. They should be able to recognize that much. But the alcohol has told them, no, it's okay. You're just fine. Isaiah 1, verse 4. Isaiah 1, verse 4. Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers. Oh, whoa. What did he say about them? Evildoers. These are his children. Now, notice he did not call them evil. He said a seed of evildoers. You could be a Christian and do evil. Matter of fact, we all do from time to time. That didn't change their family. They're still his children. If doing evil made you change families, then they would have not been called his children or his people. They've been called the devil's people, but they're not. They're still called his children. They're just doing evil. But God take note of it. Children that are corrupters, they have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backward. Why should you be stricken anymore? You will revolt more and more. The whole head is sick, the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it. Here's what's in their head. God can see in behind the bones and skin and the hair. He sees right in through it, and he says, here's what I see. But wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They've not been clothed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment. This is no longer a warning stop. Sometimes a cop will pull you over, and I don't know how they get to decide when it's going to be a warning and when it's going to be a ticket. I think some of it has to do with your responses. If you're respectful and it's not a major offense, then they'll write you a little warning, send you on your way. However, if you start bowing up and you get resistant and defiant and demanding your rights, then they just go ahead and show you what the law says. That's what Israel has right here. Israel, he says, I'm noticing some deep problems. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to elevate this. This has now become an all-points bulletin. There's some real problems here. Their thinking is corrupt. He said the whole head is sick. I've been sick. All last week, my whole head was sick. I had the bug. Their judgment was impaired. This is where we started with. He said, I was looking for judgment. The problem is their head. They can't use judgment anymore. I've given them my laws. They should have been able to think and reason. And so now they're picking up what the heathen are doing. And they don't have any of my rules. I didn't teach them. I didn't raise them. And yet my people are picking up their traits. Bad news. Spiritually intoxicated people lose the ability to reason. They call evil good, just like the lost world, and darkness light, and bitterness sweet. That's the sign of the lost world. Sin doesn't just stain your behavior, it infects your perception. You no longer recognize, oh, that's a problem. Discernment. Discernment's out the window nowadays. This rebellion reached a level that God said, why would I even punish them anymore? They're not learning from the spanking. That's where God's getting exasperated. He says, what I've been doing to correct them is not working. Who's saying this? God's saying it. God's saying what I'm doing is not effective. Ooh, that must be someone who's crossed the line. Correction wasn't working. Warnings only intensified their rebellion. This is the condition of a hard heart. Their anger is controlling them. Anger is a bad thing. Our passage described wounds and bruises and putrefying sores, open injuries, untreated damage, self-destruction. That's one of the signs of devil possession is when a man begins to harm himself. That kids, from time to time, you'll find this. They get into this thing called cutting, where they cut themselves. They say they want to feel something. That ain't normal. The mind is leaving, spiritually intoxicated. They can't reason correct. Because rebellion and anger always travel together, the car is packed with the devil's crew, and it may have some of God's children mixed in there too. The devil is wicked, that's true, but he's more than wicked, he's destructive. God's a creator, the devil's a destroyer. Every rebel wears the same tracksuit. It's a tracksuit of anger. Anger is a mind-altering drug. The more mad you get, the more you can't control what you say. The more mad you get, you can't control what you do. Might as well be on alcohol. Same effect. It convinces people that revenge is strength, that bitterness is wisdom, that self-destruction is freedom. But it's not. A man drunk with rage will destroy himself while he believes he's being victorious. The devil's done a number. In Proverbs 23, you can hold your place in Isaiah, we'll come back, but Proverbs 23, verse 34. Proverbs 23:34. This is talking about the drunk man. This is the passage on look not on the alcohol when it's red, when it moves itself right in the cup. Proverbs 23, verse 34. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of a sea. That is, they've been drinking so much, something's swirling around. They lay down and they feel like the room is moving. Why? Because there's spirits floating around in their noggin. Why? Because that thing they've been drinking is called spirits. He says, lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of a mast. That is like the old boat had the mast that the wind would blow. That'd be like the man who's in the crow's nest up there. Ooh, I'd hate to have that job. Imagine having to climb up there in the gale force wind and rig the sails. He said, they have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not stricken. And I felt like I got beat up, and nobody's beating on me. They've beaten me, and I felt it not. When shall I awake? When's my reasoning going to come back? Let's do it again. I will seek it yet again. Rebellion does the same thing. Alters a man's mind, makes him intoxicated. Before long, you start craving something to be mad at. You'll meet people who are not happy if they're not unhappy. That's a spirit. Rebellion. Israel became spiritually violent against itself by turning against God. You don't want to make yourself God's enemy. That's a painful place to be. Their religion became repulsive. Isaiah 1, verse 11. Isaiah 1, verse 11. Here's how mad God's going to get. Isaiah 1:11. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me? Uh-oh. Why are you sacrificing? If it means nothing to you, if your judgment is gone, your reasoning is not there, what was the sacrifice about? I didn't think about that. All of that stuff was so deep they couldn't put it together. God was forming pictures way back there, and he was saying, I'm setting this thing up so you can think, you can consider, and maybe you can understand some prophecy. But you know what's going on? The devil's got their mind. Rebellion. They can't think about it. They're just going through the motions, and God's saying, hey, why? Why are you doing the sacrifice? What that's for? They're supposed to start being able to figure that out. They were still attending their services, doing the temple sacrifice. They were observing the holy day. I mean, real religious. They were conducting assemblies, getting together in a big crowd. But God said, I'm weary to bear them. I'm getting sick of this. Because external religion can't compensate for inward rebellion. What they did was, we'll just get as selfishly intoxicated as we want. It's okay because we're going to do some extra sacrifices. And that'll make up for it. The good outweighs the bad. I'm no murderer. Sometimes you see these bumper stickers on cars that say, I support local law enforcement. Why do you think they got that on there? They're planning on doing something that the law enforcement's going to see. That bumper sticker is not going to stop an officer worthy of the badge from enforcing the law. That's what Israel's done right here. They're attending the service. They're saying, I support local law enforcement. However, God's saying, yeah, well, I see the laws you're breaking, and it's my job to enforce the law. He says down in verse 15, your hands are full of blood. God wasn't fooled by ceremony. The intoxication, he says, has become deadly. God does not expose corruption just so he can take out anger on it. That's what man does. God exposes it so that it can be healed, so he can fix it. God's not a pessimist. God's an optimist because he's got all the answers. So when he shows us it's a problem, it's to show more where the solution is. The last thing we'll see, only don't get too excited, it's going to go a while, is the requirement for the restoration. And in verse 16, this is what's required. God assumes they want to fix the issue. This is quite an assumption, though. This is like the police officer pulling you over and saying, you're free to go, but there's a court appointment here, and you just call that number and find out and all that stuff. Well, they may or may not ever do that. This is God saying, now, I've already decided I'm not taking any of your church activity as anything religious. You're not fooling me. It's all a bunch of baloney. I'm sick of you. You understand this now. He says, here's what you're going to have to do. This is what's prescribed. You got to fix the problem. I was pulled over, it's probably been a year ago, and because I had a brake light that wasn't working. Well, he just said, I'm going to write you a warning. I understand those things will go in and out. He said, just get it fixed. He didn't even tell me a time frame on which to do it. He said, you probably can't get to it immediately. Just whenever you can, get that fixed. Real nice guy. This is what God's doing. God's saying, you'll need to clean up. We need to restore this fellowship. He didn't pull them over just to beat them up. Think about it. If he wanted to destroy them, there wouldn't be any Israel left. It'd have been over with. But what he's done, he says, I've insulted you just enough. It should turn the light bulb on so you can see there must be some kind of problem. I need to go investigate this. He says in our verse, Isaiah 1 verse 16, he says, wash you, make you clean. He's inviting them back. The judge is the redeemer. Good thing. They've got to repent. He says, wash you. That is, quit being satisfied being filthy. But you know what happens when you wash? You get clean. But it doesn't stay that way, does it? What's the next thing he said? Wash you, make you clean. That is, it's going to be an ongoing process. Start thinking differently. Start thinking, uh-oh, I'm dirty again. I need another bath. That's different than one wash. It's a perpetual cleansing. Now, once you start thinking differently, you start acting differently. That's admitting I failed. I need to be restored. And then it's recognizing every time filth shows up. They've got to pursue holiness. This temporary change is an Oprah Winfrey thing. Oprah Winfrey, religion is feel good. Well, once you feel good, then you're done. God says, no, start thinking right. Think righteously. And then you'll get more and more light to clean more and more. They've got to learn some righteousness. And by that, I mean relearn it. He'd already given them righteous commandments and laws. These are his children. They've been quoting those verses and doing all the ceremonies for hundreds of years. They got to relearn it because it wasn't going in. He says in verse 17, learn to do well. That is, it's a process. You know, you learn something, you do it wrong, and you get smacked in the face for it, and it backfires on you. You start down some path, and you realize it didn't go where you thought it was going to go. Okay, you learn. You start recognizing. But you know what's required with learning? Judgment. You're thinking. What's going on in your noggin? God's people should be the most reasonable people on the planet. Because all we do should be reasoning. The way we're reasoning this, whatever it is you're going to do, does God like this? Does God not like this? God, do you want me to do this? Do you want me not to do this? We're reasoning. We're weighing evidence. We're looking at things and calculating them. Very different than the world. Rebellion had made these people spiritually irrational. Their mind wasn't working right. So he says, guess what? You got to go relearn all the things that I've been teaching you for hundreds of years. He said, my people does not consider. They ain't been thinking. Therefore, go start some learning so you can start considering. They had lost sound judgment. He says, seek judgment. Remember that's what they were supposed to be doing? Sometimes you realize you can't think right. You know, the tragedy is a lot of people don't realize they're stupid. And they're satisfied with it. That's the real problem. He says to them to do this. Seek judgment. That is, seek to think better. Relieve the oppressed. Judge the fatherless. What does he mean by that? What's the word judge mean? It doesn't mean condemn. Everybody sees that word and they want to make it harsh. That's not the way it's being used. It's judge. That is reason like you're the fatherless. Are you the one without a father? Think what they're thinking. Help them. That is, if you're judging the fatherless, you're going to be oppressing them. If you're doing it the way the world sees the word, no, judge, use your reasoning ability. He gives the next thing, plead for the widow. Same sentence. That is, you put yourself in the place of the widow. And instead of being an oppressor, you be a supporter. See, it's all engineered to change their way of thinking. In other words, God says, stop living selfishly and begin reflecting the character of God like you were supposed to from the beginning. Oppression is the cheap counterfeit of judgment. It's easy to oppress somebody. You can be the dictator and tell them what's supposed to be and not supposed to be, and big bad boss. However, it's not so easy to use some rationale, because then you got to slow down, you got to think. Immediately we jump down to verse 18. He says, come now. That is assuming they've done everything on the list prior to this. If they've done everything on the list prior to this, what has happened is their thinking has changed. So after that, he says, come now. I want you to see the next phrase. Let us reason together, saith the Lord. That's judgment, reasoning. Let us reason together. This is not about communication or negotiation. It's about restoration for a mission. You're going to reason, you're going to judge with God. That's reason together. That is both of us reasoning the same way, of the same mind. That's what he wanted them to do. When your judgment becomes sound again, the fellowship will be restored and you can get back to work. That's what he's saying. In conclusion, we find it's not all happy ice cream and birthday parties, unfortunately. The chapter is going to close with an ominous warning. Isaiah 1, verse 20. But if you refuse and rebel, that's a rebel who's rebelling. Ye shall be devoured with the sword, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken. It says, this is how you get clean, and here's the benefits of it, and we can be a great team again. And however, if not, here's what you got coming. I've got a sword. Isaiah gives us this vineyard picture using the same ideas. Look at it in chapter 4 or chapter 5, verse 4. This is from God's point of view. God's talking about the whole house of Israel being his vineyard. Verse 4, he says, what could have been done more to my vineyard that I've not done? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. What a statement. God's saying, I'm perplexed. What else could I have done? He planted this vineyard. He protected it, put a hedge around it. He provided for it. He warned his people. He pleaded with them. He corrected them. And yet rebellion remained. You know how you know if you got a rebellion problem? Look in the mirror. If you're still wearing flesh, guess what? It's part of the package. In some degree, we've all got a rebellion problem at some point in time. Now, I'm not saying you've got it 24/7 and you're always in a bad mood and rebellious, but at some point, we've got to deal with rebellion. It's always there. God's mercy is real, but so is his authority. He's the judge of all the earth. And he says, if you won't do this and you're going to continue down the rebellious path, look out, I've got a sword and I know how to work it. And I'm not scared to use it. Don't let anger drive your decisions. That's a doorway to rebellion. Don't let pride keep you from repentance. That's another rebellion. You know, it's as much rebellion for a Christian to refuse to repent as it is for him to get angry. Both of those are rebellion. Don't accept religion in place of relationship. You know, a lot of people do spiritual activities as though that's going to impress God. God can see beyond that. What is that? What of your religious activity is going to endure into the millennium? How long is that going to last? Okay, if it's the relationship you build between you and God, that will be there. That's a good one. That's the one that's important. Isaiah 5, verse 10. Isaiah 5, verse 10. Here's these people who've rebelled and continued to rebel. He says the sword's going to come after you. Here's what happens, verse 10. 10 acres of vineyard shall yield one bath, and the seed of an omer shall yield an ephah. You know what he's done here? He said, you're my people. I've given you my laws. Now I'm trying to make it plain to you. You've offended me. What he said right here is, now you're going to tithe to me 90%. I'm giving you 10 instead of you giving it to me. Your 10 acres is only going to give you one bath. He's reversed it. The light's still not coming on, verse 14. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory and their multitude and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. Ooh, this is a warning. He's telling them of something future that's going to happen. You know what that is? That's a warning sign. That is, you could stop before you fall off the cliff right ahead. He's still warning. Look down at verse 16. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment. You know, we get to heaven and he lays out the books and declares the judgments. We'll all agree with it. It opens our minds so that we understand again. So that we understand clearly like him. Even the lost world, when they stand before him at the great white throne judgment, they will have perfect understanding. And they'll agree with the sentence that's going against them. I'll give you one last thought and we'll be done. Nehemiah 8. Nehemiah 8, verse 10. Y'all let me go too long without preaching, so now I got to get my money's worth. I said, Nehemiah 8, verse 10. I'm going to leave you on a happy note here. He said to them, go your way, eat the fat. Let's eat. No. And drink the sweet, and send portions unto them for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy unto our Lord. Neither be ye sorry, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. This is how you get through life. The joy of the Lord will strengthen you. And the times that you want to rebel, here's the opposite road. Get strength from God. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Now let's take that thought a little farther. Psalm 78. Psalm 78, verse 41. Here's the children of Israel. This is David's recounting their travels. Psalm 78, verse 41. Yea, they turned back and tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. Could you imagine that? God putting a limiter on God, or a man putting a limiter on God? That's what children of Israel did. They limited him. How do you limit the Almighty? Well, what did we learn before? The joy of the Lord is your strength. If you cause him to not have joy, you know how that results in your life? Less strength. The 3 John, 3 John, verse 4. 3 John, verse 4. John says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. That is a wild statement. He says right here, the greatest joy of all the things he could have picked. If you were going to decide as a Christian where your greatest joy is, would you have come up with this one? I'm sure that's the reason that Christians today are so weak. Is most of God's children aren't walking in truth. And therefore, God ain't looking down and having much joy on them. And it's his joy that gives us strength. And without strength, we revert back to our own flesh. And you know what the best thing the flesh can do? Best thing the flesh can do is be a rebel. You're one of two. You're either making God happy and getting strength out of it, or you're making the devil happy and self-destructing. All right, that's our message for today. That's the authoritative judgment of the intoxicated rebel.